June 26, 2023. Today, with all the new changes coming up on July 11th, I decided to kind of circle back to some of the most widely used forms that we're going to see and talk about some of those changes, as well as some best practices for using those forms. So today we'll be talking about the purchase and sale agreements, and in this I'm referencing all purchase and sale agreements other than the multifamily. So as realtors, we need to be the experts. This includes not only what we know, but to execute our contracts and how we draft them. We are held to the standard of care of a lawyer, so we need to use these skills and they are non-negotiable. We will be looking at writing up the purchase and sale agreement and discussing the upcoming changes, like I said, with the forms. So first, as kind of a refresher for some people, anything that is misspelled in an offer is not considered a counteroffer if you need to change it. We do want to make sure though that we are keeping an eye on the offer expiration date. Buyer and seller names should be their full legal names, and we need to make sure that we also have the legal description attached. Double check your parcel numbers. And the changes that have happened with this form are more of cleanup changes. So they've added S, which seems, kind of inconsequential, but things were happening, like there was an extra refrigerator inside a garage. So, what did you do before? There were multiple things that you wanted to have added into the sale. Now they've put just all washers, all dryers, all refrigerators, all attached TVs. So keep that in mind for your sellers. If they have a garage fridge that they don't want to include in a sale, you may want to make reference in the excluded items. And know that if they've checked one of these boxes, it refers to everything in the house.
So if there is more than one, do you want to not check it at all and then put it in the marks saying kitchen fridge included, garage fridge not included?
So in the included items, I would just check the box. And if you want to exclude one thing, I would either put it in the excluded items or make a note in the other line. Only the refrigerator in the kitchen.
There's no excluded items?
No, the excluded items are on the 20, optional clauses. So if you're going to exclude, say, a wine fridge, they want to take their wine fridge with them, make sure you write it in the excluded items. Because the new change encompasses all those things. Attached televisions, you're leaving all of them, seller. If you have multiple washer dryers, you're leaving all of them if these boxes are checked.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the exceptions that everything in the house is going.
Anything checked refers to everything that's in the house that fits that category.
So now instead of checking to include stuff, now you have to check to exclude stuff.
You'll want to make sure yes, you're not saving any work with these changes.
Yeah.
They're just saying, hey, if I check the box that says refrigerator, seller, you're leaving me all your refrigerators.
If you aren't up on this new quarantine. Yeah.
Someone's gonna write a check.
What if you don't want the fridge in the garages?
Excluded items.
The buyer-
Yep, excluded items. Deb, are you trying to ask a question?
Would you like hot dogs? Delicious. We're wondering about what's inside.
Oh shoot, sorry.
No, not asking a question. Okay.
She's talking about hot dogs.
I don't know what she's talking about. The other change that is coming up has to do with the earnest money. So up until now, we did have to check how the earnest money was coming in, but at the end of the day, it really didn't matter how it got to escrow as long as it got to escrow. So there was no consequence before if you said you were writing a check, but yet came in and delivered a wire. And because it seemed, pointless to have these boxes here, they are no longer going to be in the purchase and sale agreement. They have specified US dollars. I can't help think why. Maybe some Canadian decided to come in and pay with Canadian dollars. But there are US dollar changes, and then it doesn't matter how the money gets to escrow as long as it is delivered to escrow by the date. Okay, earnest money, let's talk about earnest money for just a second. If the earnest money is due on the date agreed, so whether the buyer backs out or not, there's an obligation set forth that requires the money to be delivered to escrow. If the money is late or does not get delivered on the date, do not write up an addendum to extend this obligation. So instead, you'll want to notify your client. If you represent the buyer, have them get the earnest money to escrow as soon as possible. And if you represent the seller, you need to have notes in your file, and this includes the firm file, that you did give them notice that they have the right to terminate until the money reaches escrow. Does anybody have any comments or questions about that? Okay.
I'll just say one thing on that, and this is just a point of discussion, because we had several of our listings where earnest money got turned in late, and then us representing the sellers were going out and trying to get the buyers to sign an addendum that we accepted it late, which really, you know, it's the onus isn't on us. They're the ones that did not fulfill their contractual obligations, and so the sellers at that point are going out and putting them back into contract and giving away their protections, and so that's kind of where this is coming from.
Yeah, and really, once the earnest money gets delivered, that breach has been satisfied. So there's nothing to fix once the money is already there. That tension, the point of contention is going to be within those times that the earnest money is late and it has not been delivered yet. So if we do want to protect our sellers, we should not be signing an addendum. We should be allowing them to just exercise their freedom to terminate if they choose. And if they don't choose, sellers, did I say sellers?
No, I'm just making sure that people understand the sellers have the right to terminate because the buyer
Yes.
did not deliver.
Yes, okay. Yes, the sellers. So we just want to make sure that they know that they still have their right to terminate until that buyer gets the earnest money in. But once it's in, all of the breach has been fixed. We can't go back and we can't say, oh, hey, you were late. So, you know, I'm backing out now, even though the money's there. You can't say that. Once the money's back there, the breach has been fixed and we move forward. Okay, included items. So I thought I would just kind of go over included items and see what people do consider included items. This could be multiple items, like more than one refrigerator or TV. It would be all of them. So how do you prove an included item has been left? And what should you do if you don't want items to stay? And then as a buyer, how would you ensure you get the same included items from the day you purchased? I don't know if anybody's ever walked through a house, done your initial showing. They love it. That refrigerator in the garage is sub-zero. It's great. They want it. And when they get to the closing table, they realize the garage fridge had been swapped out for something else, or something didn't stay that they thought was supposed to stay. So how do you, first of all, represent your client and make sure that those included items stay?
Take pictures.
I'm really interested to see how everybody's going to respond to this. I just was in a real estate class, and one of the gals had this exact same situation. She represented the buyer. They had the included items were clearly marked on the purchase and sale agreement. When they did the walkthrough, the items had been removed from the house. When she notified, I think just with a phone call to the agent, the listing agent, he said those will not be included with the sale. So she put it in writing, and he also responded that those items will not be there. So the discussion with the moderator, after going around and around with different people, was that really the buyers the buyer should still close or risk not performing, and to pursue small claims court with the seller after closing, because if the buyer didn't close, they then would be risking also being, they would possibly be seen as not performing and risk their earnest money. So that was a discussion we just went through. So I'm curious what you think.
I probably have a super unpopular opinion of this. Does anybody else have an opinion before I say my super unpopular opinion? No.
I think it depends on what the items are. I mean, sometimes if it's a small item, I would just cover it, just to get it closed. Like I had a transaction once where it was a divorce, so that's always sticky. And I had the buyers and the sellers were going through divorce, and those were her curtains. She was going to, he had them included, but she was going to take them, and he wasn't willing to pay the difference. So I just compensated money-wise, to cover, just to get the deal closed.
Okay, well,
I wonder, Karen, if that was because, do you think the moderator considers that to be personal property and not material to the actual purchase and sale of the real property?
Yeah, I don't know. Basically that, and I was curious what Annie Fitzsimmons would say on this. Could a buyer just not closing, right? Are they in breach of the contract then? Just for the sake of this conversation, it was 2 mounted TVs plus I think it was a refrigerator. It was a couple appliances and maybe a washer and dryer. So it was a significant amount. It was a first-time home buyer, right? So those items were, they were significant to her. So it was an interesting discussion.
Yeah, that is interesting.
So it's pretty clearly stated in the purchase and sale that curtains are technically part of the attached items. So that's interesting that came up, but I am more interested in the response of the moderator that told you to close. In my opinion, maybe unpopular, when you do your final walkthrough and you sign any closing papers, you're accepting everything the way it is. And if there's something that you're not bringing to light with the final walkthrough, then you're basically saying, I'm good with what it is, and we're gonna be done with this. Your walkthrough is your chance to come to find all these things and to make sure that everything is in the condition you thought you were buying it. So in my opinion, if an item is not there that's supposed to be there, I would hesitate having my buyer sign any closing documents, accepting that everything to move forward.
Are they in danger of losing their earnest money if they don't?
It's arguable that they're not, because the seller also didn't keep up their end of the contract as well. And I've gone over several different scenarios with the legal hotline over this. But we do have our final walkthrough, which is, it holds weight. Our final walkthrough holds weight. We don't do it for no reason. If we didn't have the opportunity to bring this back to the attention, what's the point of a final walkthrough? So
What happens if you want to do a final walkthrough with your clients, but they can't, or they're in the process of moving, so they decline the final walkthrough, but then after they've moved in, they see that there's something that
happens a lot. Not being able to do a final walkthrough, or having your agent do a final walkthrough for you, which I would highly suggest never doing. As long as the buyer knows that they have the right to do the walkthrough, if they choose not to do the walkthrough, that's on them.
Okay.
Yeah. they can choose not to do the walkthrough if they don't want to, or you could, if it's really, really important, you could negotiate an extended closing to give them an opportunity to come in and do a final walkthrough. You can always modify the contract if you need to. I think if there was a dispute large enough, I would probably suggest extending closing to figure it out rather than trying to rush in your last couple of days to come up with something that suits everybody. And you know, a lot of times what happens if you close with one of these items that should have been included is, you know, the broker's end up writing a check because, oops, we forgot to do this and it's in the contract and you're trying to, you know, be more customer service at that point. One suggestion that I have, just to make sure that what you're purchasing is what you're getting in the end, is when you take marketing pictures, add all the appliances into your marketing pictures. Whether you put them in the listing or not, take pictures of the washer and dryer, take pictures of refrigerators, dishwashers, make a note even of the brands as you're doing your initial walkthrough with the buyer, as you're looking, if you go under contract, make a little note or take pictures, keep your marketing pictures of what you're buying then. Now it is possible that when a seller goes through this process, if any time between mutual acceptance and closing, something breaks, they can replace it. But it has to be replaced with a like kind quality, you know.
Yeah.
They can't replace a Sub-Zero fridge with, you know, a
Frigidaire.
Kenmore. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know the brands and where they lie on the.
A wolf.
Yes, you have to replace it with the, with like, so. I guess it's my opinion and take it for what you will if you'd like, but your final walkthrough is your chance to do this. And when you move from the final walkthrough and they go to the closing table, they are signing that they are fine with everything the way that it is. I mean, and this includes everything from inspection repairs to just the home condition. Now, some things are going to be debatable. We could argue that, you know, with cleaning, you know, what's considered clean, what's considered rubbish and debris, you know, like, so we could get into the nitty-gritty on that part. But once they go to the closing table, you're out of the picture, and yes, it will have to go to small claims at that point. But it is debatable whether the seller is actually holding up their end of the contract as well by not leaving the items they had already agreed to leave.
Would that be an out for the buyer, and your breach contract because you're not leaving them in the scope?
As far as an out, I don't know. That's gonna have to be. I don't know if there would be an out for either one of them at the closing table. If it came down to what's included, what's not included, or how did you leave the condition of this property? And I'm not sure you could even really find a solid answer on the legal hotline on that one. But yes, up until that point, the buyer should be definitely making all attempts to keep under contract and not breach. If that means delivering a check to escrow, then that means delivering a check. However, if they sign, then they are accepting everything. So I'm not saying don't deliver the check to escrow. What I'm saying is if they sign, they're accepting everything the way it is. I would definitely recommend still delivering the money to escrow at the time they're supposed to. I would recommend everything on the back end happening. But if for some reason there's something that is very wrong with the house, the appliances, anything that stays that they, you know, are going to have an issue with, really try to extend closing to get that figured out. Or let them know that once they sign, there's nothing you can do at that point.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah. Another
So sorry,
Go ahead.
I'm just thinking like we're in a contingency situation where, you know, everything's going through, but their house is closing and they're moving at the same time this house is closing. So it's like if they're down in Buckley area, so they're not, it's like they don't want to do, I don't think, a final walkthrough really.
Just be careful doing final walkthroughs for your clients.
Yeah,
because their eyes will see different than your eyes.
yes.
And you don't wanna skip over something that would be important to them.
Mhm.
You know, like, does the toilet flush? Well, they may wanna know if the toilet flushes. You may walk through and be like, wow, the bathroom looks clean. So
Yeah.
if you can avoid doing one for them, I would,
Okay.
You see a FaceTime or something.
or a FaceTime, maybe okay.
Questions about this room?
Yeah, yeah.
Flush the toilet?
You need to open up a drawer in the kitchen, and I mean, just be really careful because that's their chance, and we don't wanna take away too many of their chances to do their own work. Speaking of which, it's a great segue, because they have changed the information verification line on all of the purchase and sale agreements to be negotiable now. So instead of crossing off the entire paragraph, you can now just write 0 days or 1 day. You can say that it's been satisfied or waived. That means they're not, yep, it's a lot more clear. And then there is a definition that tells them what that means in the body of the purchase and sale. So if they don't need to do information verification or you're just taking it completely out of the contract, feel free to check the box that says satisfied or waived. And then if you just want to shorten the time that you give them, you can write in it expires so many days after. This does have a default day. If you forget to check either of these boxes, it goes back to the original timeline, which is in the body of the purchase and sale.
Do you talk over these things with your client? Like, are you,
Yes.
are you gonna be talking this over with your clients in the future about like the
Yes,
changes and stuff and?
definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I won't be presenting it as a change for them, but it is one of those things because we are a buyer beware state. We want to give them at least some opportunity to inspect something. We don't want to take everything away from them, but if they're trying to be really competitive and they want to waive all the contingencies, this is another contingency right here that you could just check satisfied.
okay.
It looks like it's changed, but it has not. The agency disclosure is the same and the rest of the contract on this page is the same. And just as a side note, nothing in the addendum line, if it's changed, needs to be initialed. It is simply just a list of what you're keeping in the contract. It's also encouraged to update as you add more things, more addendum in the contract. I haven't been able to keep up with that personally, but kudos to everybody else who can. All right, so what if there is an addenda change? Like what if you forget a 22J or Island County disclosure or anything like that? Any disclosure, yes. So if there's a disclosure that was supposed to go in the contract, but for some reason didn't quite make it, you're going to have to renegotiate putting it back in there for certain ones, like a 22D. But with disclosures like the lead-based paint, you can deliver it after if you had forgotten. Just keep in mind the buyer does get 3 days to back out once they receive a disclosure that should have been put in. If you have a 22D that you needed to add, you will need to renegotiate this. It will not be automatically added in. None of the disclosures just automatically get put in. And keeping in mind disclosures, they protect both buyer and seller for the most part. So if you did forget to put one in, it would be best if you could try to get it back into the contract, especially things like being in the noise zone or lead-based paint is required by the regulate this. So if you forgot to do that, get it in there. Doesn't matter about the 3 days, you need to get it in there.
So even if you don't, the buyer or his agent doesn't include it in the initial offer, it still has to be
Yes,
signed.
most of the time it's technically a counter offer because you can't fill it in for the seller. So if you're a buyer putting an offer in with the lead-based paint addendum, you can't check the boxes about the seller knowing or not knowing anything. You have to put it over there and then them sending that back.
So this, the seller doesn't include it, the seller's agent doesn't include it in the list of.
Right.
paperwork.
Mhm.
Then you write it off, and do you want to include that in there with it? Or does it just leave it out there and it still needs to be signed at a later date?
It will need to go in either way. So it's gonna be up to you as far as how you want to get it put in. I mean, you can have the mutually signed
But
contract.
you not putting it in there initially doesn't waive your right to have it.
Correct. Right. You don't waive your right to have it, you get it. Unless I'm completely off the wall. You get it. If there's like if it's pre-1978, then you are entitled to get that anytime in the contract if they have not done it.
So if there's multiple offers that you're trying to waive everything.
Oh, yeah, just get it signed around, get mutual.
But if they didn't include that. Because their new agent didn't know or whatever. And then it has to be signed after the facts. That gives the buyer, I don't really would not normally have.
But the 22J out isn't really, I mean, it isn't out when it's the 3-day. The addendum itself doesn't necessarily give them an out, they have to actually find land-based paint to get out of the 22J. But yes, it technically does give them a 3-day right of rescission, I think it's called. But it's a right to terminate because they didn't receive they're getting new information. So kind of think of it like the Form 17. You know, it's new information, they get the 3 days to mull it over and decide like, okay, I can deal with this new information. If you are strategically trying to get this offer locked in, lock it in, deal with the 22J later, you know, because you can get it in later. You can just say, hey, I noticed we didn't get the 22J, let's do that. You know, I know we're mutual, let's do that. It can still be mutual and then go after the 22J. So if you're in a situation where you have to just get that offer one, get the offer one, do what you need to do to get it one. Okay, information verification, I kind of skimmed over it, but does anybody have any input, experiences, or questions on information verification, that contingency they've added?
Before July 11th, are we still saying don't cross that out? But change the number of days if you want to, but don't.
So I think it is best practice to not cross it out completely. Change the number of days if you have to, but I really think that if we're talking about making sure that we're servicing our clients the best of our ability, we should at least have a day on there. Because I mean, what constitutes information verification? What are the things that we're going to find with information verification? It's going to be things like incorrect zoning or incorrect number of bedrooms or bathrooms, square footage. I mean, it's going to be material information. If you have somebody who has an inspection contingency, you know, they're obviously going to look at the same things when they're there. But I think as best practice, I would probably recommend not crossing it out and turning it to 0 days. Putting a number of days in there, put 1 day in there. I mean,
My understanding of it was that if you cross it out, it's actually reducing the rights of the seller down the road. So multiple office situation and trying to later anything, crossing that out is actually hurting the seller and not benefiting them.
I'm not too familiar with the thought behind that.
Because it allows, by crossing it out, it means it's not part of the contract anymore. The buyer could come back 10 years from now and say, hey, you didn't tell me about this.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure, because anytime you cross off an opportunity for a client or for a buyer to figure things out on their own, you're putting everything back in the hands of the seller. Including like Form 17, if the Form 17 never gets delivered, you know, the consequence will happen throughout the contract of the Form 17 never being delivered, but if it never gets delivered, then and the buyer waives all their inspection contingencies and everything else, then there is argument that the seller was withholding. So I can see how that would go back to a seller if you don't give them any opportunity along the way for any of this discovery. Is that what you're saying?
No, I was saying that the seller could be liable for something down the road
Okay,
that's part of that was crossed out. You know, the buyer found something material down the road. they can come back to the original seller and say, you can tell me about this as soon.
Yeah.
Whereas
So it's
if
back-
Still there, and he was waived or whatnot, and. Buyer is accepting it the way it was.
Okay, yeah, I see that. So
So for us,
would not cross it out, yes. Specifically for your example. But. Yeah, I absolutely agree. If there is anything you do find though, in information verification, there's a new form. 90Z, so if you find materially inaccurate information and you want to have your client back out on the paragraph W. You just put in form 90Z, and I think I pulled up a picture of it right here. This is the 90Z. You would just list the materially inaccurate information. Can we add more forms, please? Can we add more forms? We'll double Z it, but there's a double Z.
Oh, okay.
Double Z was already taken, so, or not 90 double Z, but. So here you write the materially inaccurate information. I still in my mind am wondering how you prove materially inaccurate information. Do you need to prove it? I don't know the answer to all that. This one makes my brain overthink, but this is the form you'd use for information verification. I don't know if anybody's ever actually done that, but here you go. Okay. As a summary, your purchase and sale agreement should have the buyer and seller's full names on the front page of the purchase and sale, have the buyer and seller's full signatures at the bottom of the page, have a mutually signed contract before any deadlines in the offer or counter offer expire. Be timestamped if there's a time deadline. So if the offer expires at 5 p.m. and you want to prove that everything was signed around, you can also have them timestamp their signature.
Oh, I mean, yeah,
It's not them to sign.
really. Oh,
Because
cause I mean, it's come close, like. Right?
Also,
they sign it before the deadline, but it doesn't deliver until after the deadline.
and technically they're not. They're not correct, yes. It's always helpful to just write, hey, mutual acceptance this, just make sure everybody's on the same page, just make sure the other agent is also aware that mutual acceptance did or did not happen.
It is not based on.
No, it's
when
based on
signed.
delivery, yeah. It just helps, like if they signed it at 10 a.m., on that date, or 5:01, 4:59. I wish there was a way to timestamp the delivery on the purchase and sale, but you can keep the time stamped on the email. Have a closing date. So if you can avoid it, please avoid using on or before. It really adds no value to a contract. I know sometimes escrow companies really prefer on or before, so they have the ability to close before, but it doesn't technically just give a free rite of passage for the closing to happen on the contract itself. It still needs to be a decided date. So if you can avoid it, please avoid it. If you're using a counter offer or making a counter offer, make sure you're using the counter offer addendum. It is much more clean than hashing out a bunch of lines. Especially if there's more than one change, or if it can't be just easily lined out. Even if you think you're making one change that's easily lined out, if that change gets counter offered and counter offered and counter offered, it becomes quite lengthy. And then in the case of 22B sales, make sure your closing date either says C22B or a date is written in there. If a date is written in there, it doesn't really hold much weight because it is decided by the 22B sale. But we'll want to put something in there. So either write a closing date or C22B. Okay, mutual acceptance refresher. So if an offer expires Monday and the buyer signs Sunday at 10:45, what day is mutual acceptance? And if the offer expires Monday and the buyer signs at Monday at 9:30 PM, what is mutual acceptance? Mutual acceptance is the date signed for the one on Sunday. And for Monday, because it's after the offer expiration time, it's not mutual unless it's signed around one more time after 9:30. Okay, possession. Possession and closing. So when is possession and when is closing, and what happens if they're different? And why does it matter? So if possession happens any day other than closing, we need to have either a 65A or a 65B. This includes if a buyer wants to store things in a garage or park vehicles in the property. I'm not talking hours before closing, I'm talking a day or more before closing. So the reason for this is because there's a lot of things that have to do with insurance and liability in both of these forms. It covers our bases. If the possession is happening any day before closing, again, the form is 65A, and anything after closing, the form is 65B. If you want to add a 22Y recording in this to just cover slow recording counties, you can. It doesn't change the time of possession, it only changes the definition of the closing date. So the closing date will be the date that you send all the paperwork over. But the keys, if not decided another time, are transferred at 9 PM the date of closing. If you want to transfer keys before that, just make a note somewhere in the contract, and you can deliver the keys after recording if you choose. I just pulled up right here. This is the 65A. There's been some changes to the 65A and B, and they're pretty minor, so I just kind of threw these forms in here because of those changes. They took out the words landlord and tenant, because when you do a real estate rent back under 90 days, you are not considered protected under the Landlord Tenant Act. So they chose to change the wording to renter and owner. If you're doing this, just as a reminder, make sure you put some sort of rent here. It could be $1. It could be all of the market rent, but payable at a different time. If you want to make this free and follow the rent, get a rent payment here, figure out what a market rent would be. So say the market rent's $1,500 a month. I don't know if that's realistic here. But if the market rent is $1,500 per month, have the rent be due $1,500 per month. And then upon closing, the money can be refunded back to the occupant or the seller, whoever you want the money to go to back and forth. Or you can make the rent $1 per week until the day they're supposed to move in or out. And then from that point, the rent changes to a market rent. There are ways to protect your clients against having these rent backs and early occupancies. Does anybody see a negative to an early occupancy if you represent a buyer and the buyer wants to move in early?
Something happens. Property or something.
Yeah, potentially. But on the buyer side, is there a downside to being a buyer moving in early?
Right? Seems like you'd be.
Yeah, I can't really think of a huge downside for the buyer if the buyer were to move in early. Now the seller does carry the weight of the responsibility for the structure itself. They still have to keep it insured, but a buyer has to insure their own personal property. Sellers are the ones taking the risk on an early occupancy. And then this one right here, I just pulled up the 65B. And this is for sellers who stay in the home after closing. I think we've all seen this pretty recently, but they did also change these words to renter and owner. And my slide is a little bit too big, but down here, there is a change that says no rent can be paid or accepted after 90 days. Or it automatically converts this relationship from renter owner to landlord tenant, and then they are subject to the landlord tenant law. So if you want to avoid the landlord tenant law and you want to take advantage of HB 1070, keep the rent under 90 days and do not accept any rent payment past that time. Quick update too on the FERPTA paragraph. They've added the verbiage that the seller shall pay fees incurred by the buyer related to such withholding and payment. If they are non-resident.
Why would the buyer incur these?
If the buyer. If the seller doesn't, right now, if the seller doesn't claim that they're not a citizen, the ultimate responsibility has been falling on the shoulders of the buyer. Yeah, that's why the FERPTA was such a big deal to be turned into escrow. That's why the FERPTA is an out for a buyer if the seller doesn't turn it in. Because up until recently, it's, falls on the buyer.
So what if it's just from. What if it's a family trust, right? And members within the family trust, some are and some aren't.
I believe it's how the family trust is taxed. It's only about the tax withholdings.
Okay.
So if it's the trust, it's gonna go off of how the trust withholdings are.
So the buyer could be responsible for taxes
It could be.
of the seller?
It could be. And they've added this verbiage that says seller's gonna pay them. So little words, big changes. There's been a feasibility change too in the purchase and sale on vacant land. So I just wanted to pull this one up. And there was always a box that we could check for feasibility. But it didn't really explain what that was, and it didn't really specify what happened when you put other addendum in the purchase and sale that also had feasibility terms. So they've added this feasibility paragraph that just explains it a little better. Also, my favorite line is the last sentence, and it says the feasibility contingency addendum form 35F, if included in this agreement, supersedes the feasibility contingency in specific term number 15 and the general term B. So it spells out very clearly if you have two conflicting timelines, which one will supersede the other. This also doesn't give them an out unless they choose to give notice. So depending on how your buyer wants to perform the feasibility will potentially depend on which other forms you use or ones in place of this general paragraph.